Harry has stuck to the model of the Duke of York's right over the centuries, where they do cause trouble. They don't fit in because they hit a point in their lives where they think, well, hang about, I have absolutely no function at all. I am nothing. I'm never going to be king. I have no actual power. I'm just this person who can be sent on light royal duties. And if the king can't face another boring meeting with the world's most boring head of state, they can send the Duke of York off. And so many Dukes of York have kind of tried to kill their brothers, or managed to kill their brothers, or raised armies against it, or just misbehaved terribly over these. So Harry's behavior is absolutely nothing.
Hello, today's guest is comedy legend Charlie Higson. He's an actor, author of the Young Bond novels, and in this episode we're talking Charlie's successful podcast Willy Willy Harry Stee, which covers all the Monarchs over several series. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to me and Charlie chatting the monarchy. Charlie, it's a great pleasure to have you on. Thank you. This is a real honor for me as a student growing up in the 90s. I think you can imagine why it might be.
Yes, well, I must say I enjoyed the 90s. There was a lot of good comedy around, and it was great fun to be part of that and to be making a show, The Fast Show, which is still popular today. And we've managed to make it this far without being cancelled.
That is a truly impressive achievement. And I was listening because we're here to talk about your podcast,
Yes.
Willy Willy Harry Stee. But I was listening to one of your episodes, and you're doing Fast Show tours as well, aren't you? Sorry, we're going slight tangent.
Well, no,
okay.
that's fine. That's fine. I'll talk about whatever you like.
Splendid.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing, and perhaps not what people expected of me was to make a history podcast. And maybe it was foolish. Maybe I should have started comedy and just done a Fast Show podcast and got millions of listeners. The rest is the Fast Show. But I love history, and I'm fascinated by it, and I've really got into it in a big way in the last few years, mainly through doing events at the Chalk History Festival. And yeah, I mean, I started the podcast. I launched it for King Charles's coronation in 2023. It's just a history of the monarchy. And yes, halfway through, back in April 24, I went on tour. We did a Fast Show tour, 30th anniversary this year, 24. And that was huge fun. And we are hoping to do some more next year.
Right.
Hoping.
Excellent.
But yeah, I mean, it was really good fun going back to, because I haven't really made any comedy for a long while. And so going back to it and realizing how much people loved it was heartening and very encouraging. The tour was greatest hits. We were talking about the show and reliving some of our favorite moments. And the audience was there. They were all there because they liked the show. So it was a great sort of shared feeling and a shared love of having a good laugh. So yeah, it was a lovely thing to do.
Yeah. I was watching a few clips on YouTube and reminding how how great they are in such a short little clips. But the podcast, you actually, having listened to a number of episodes, you are putting quite a lot of work into this. It's not like me. I get to sort of interview people, and they've written books and done all the effort, and I can just.
I know. Well, I mean, occasionally I've managed to do an episode where someone has published a story, and I think, oh well, that's great. That ties in exactly what I'm doing. I'll just talk to them, and yes, I don't have to do any work at all, and it's brilliant. But for the rest of them, I foolishly thought, well, that won't be too much work. I know a bit about the monarchy. They don't have to be that long. I'll skate over the surface, and then because the format of the show is I talk for the first half of the show, and then I get an expert historian on the second half, and I talk to them. But as soon as I started doing it, I thought, well, even to just skate over the surface or something, you've got to know what's important and what isn't, and what are the main sort of headline facts of a monarch's reign, and to be able to understand that. And often I'll have done my bit, and I'll be talking to the historian, and I'll realize often that I've got something completely wrong, and I have to go back and read it, or that I've dismissed as boring and unimportant probably the key thing from their reign. So yeah, it's taken up so much more of my time than I had envisaged, foolishly had envisaged, because I've taken on 1,000 years of British history. I mean, I'll go even further now, because having done the first run of the monarchs up to Charles, I've gone back to the Saxon and the Viking monarchs from Alfred the Great onwards, and then I'm probably just going to pick up with interesting people through history. So it's a huge amount to cover, and I wanted to do it properly. I think there are probably, there are sort of two types of podcast, aren't they? Well, there's probably three. There's the sort of one like your one where you're interviewing people with interesting books and whatever. But outside of that, you've got the sort of chatty podcasts, two blokes down the pub type of thing, or a husband and wife jocularly, if that's a word, talking about marriage and relationships, or those sort of things that you can sort of toss off in a couple of hours and then just shove out and people can have on in the background. Or there are ones which are properly researched and in depth, and that's what I've gone for, because I wanted it to be something that would stand the test of time, that it's a resource that people can go to, and it is. I've always liked to do things properly. I'm not very good at tossing things off.
Well, that's interesting, because I was listening to, well, my favorite monarch, and listeners will be familiar with this. It's it's not most people. I love George the Fourth.
Right.
Not because I would want to. I think if I met him, I wouldn't like him. But
nobody much seemed to at the time.
No, but I just find him so outrageous that
well, he was. I mean, well, he was. I had, because as well as historians, I occasionally get other people on who are, well, they're not known as historians, but so I've had Ian Hislop on, who's a big fan of George the Third. He loves George the Third, and his most hated monarch was George the Fourth, and you can see why. He embodies everything that Ian Hislop doesn't like. But in terms of being an entertaining character and a great monarch to do a podcast about, he's perfect.
Yeah, I thought I knew a little bit about him, but then, clearly you've done this huge amount of research, and that was just on George. And then I listened to William the Fourth, where I knew nothing about. And that how long does it take for you to prepare? Because
you keep coming back to just drumming it into me. What a fool I've been to take on this thing.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it is because I knew nothing about William the Fourth before making a podcast. He's one of those kings that most people forget ever existed. And if you're doing a kind of list of the monarchy, you sort of say, well, there were lots of Georges, and then it sort of went to Victoria, didn't it? No, but there was William in there, the Sailor King. But that's what I've really loved, actually, is finding out about the monarchs that I knew nothing about. I mean, before doing this, my main interest, I loved the sort of the medieval era, the Middle Ages, and I knew a reasonable amount of that because I was bought books, read books, and that. And I'd always been dreading getting on to, from Queen Anne onwards. I thought, oh God, we've got to make sense of all this stuff. And also, you do hit a period in history where really the prime ministers are the ones, and the governments are the ones that are really affecting people's lives on an everyday basis and running things. Monarchs become much more sort of symbolic figures, but there is something really interesting in all of them. And and I've had to research all of them as I go, because I've got to be able to keep up. When I get the experts on, I've got to ask sensible questions, and when they mention something, I've got to at least appear that I know what they're talking about.
Well, you said you started doing this because of Charles III and the coronation. I don't know if, like me, you've had a kind of changing relationship's probably the wrong word, but with the monarchy, because I think in the 90s, whilst I was watching the Fast Show and stuff like that at uni, I would have definitely have thought I would have been a Republican, undoubtedly. Yes.
Well, you should be when you're young.
Yeah, I suppose so. But I think now I'm in my late 40s, I'm much more, I guess, an appreciation of the stability of the monarchy. But I wondered what your view on monarchy is. Is
Well, that's a really interesting question, and that's something that I did talk about actually when I'd finished the series. I did some sort of mopping up episodes, and when you spend that amount of time with someone or something like the monarchy and being close to it for over a year talking about it, you do sort of form an attachment to it. And I think even if I started out by saying I'm on the fence. I'm neither a Republican nor a monarchist. I'm just interested because I think it's a fascinating story and it's central to the history of England and the history of Englishness. And it's got everything. It's a fantastically dysfunctional soap opera. But it's a bit like in The Godfather. You watch the Godfather films, and you're supposed to think, "Oh my God, these terrible mafia people who are poisoning in America and murdering people." But because you're close to them and you're following their story, you're right on their side really in the end. When they kill people, go, "Yeah, they deserved it. Stick it to them." And it's happened slightly with me with the monarchy. The people say, "Oh, why are you doing a podcast about those bastards or whatever?" And at which point I sort of immediately leaped to their defense. And one thing certainly that I thought, and as I say, I started last spring of 23 when the Conservatives were still in power and floundering about with a new leader every few weeks. I did have to say that the alternative to having a monarch as head of state is really unthinkable if it was going to be someone like Liz Truss or someone of that ilk, and that actually having someone who has been born into it and has been spent their whole life being trained to do it, and is ostensibly apolitical, it does seem to me. I think I've come down on one side of the fence and saying, actually, I think that's better than having an elected official in temporary position in this post. But I could easily be swayed the other way.
I find the most persuasive argument against the monarchy is actually to release the family itself from the constraints. I mean, obviously they've got all the castles and the palaces, but they're, as we've seen with Harry, some of them don't particularly thrive under that kind of
And
pressure.
Harry has stuck to the model of the Duke of York's right over the centuries, where they do cause trouble. They don't fit in because they hit a point in their lives where they think, well, hang about, I have absolutely no function at all. I am nothing. I'm never going to be king. I have no actual power. I'm just this person who can be sent on light royal duties. And if the king can't face another boring meeting with the world's most boring head of state, they can send the Duke of York off. And so many Dukes of York have kind of tried to kill their brothers or managed to kill their brothers or raised armies against it or just misbehaved terribly over these. So Harry's behavior is absolutely nothing. But yes, I could think of nothing worse than being a member of the royal family and being, well, actually, I could think of a lot of things worse, but it's a pretty dull experience, really, being king and the amount of royal duties you have to do. And why not have them do it? And we get some nice pictures on the postcards, and tourists can come over and take photographs and things, and it does fulfill a function. But it's there's a great story there of being born into that and how you deal with that. And I think it's one of the reasons why Queen Elizabeth was so loved. One of the things I did on the podcast is I do events every year at the Chalk History Festival, and I did one on who is the greatest monarch of all time. Inevitably, the female monarchs all came out on top, and the ultimate winner was Queen Elizabeth II, because, well, mainly because she's probably the least controversial. She managed not to do anything wrong the whole time, but she seemed to fully grasp what it was to be a monarch and what you had to do and what you had not to do. And that idea of duty to the role, duty to the state, duty to the country, or whatever all that means, she understood it and she got it, and she didn't fight against it. and that's sort of what people want. It's this weird contract between the people and the monarch, is that the monarch works for you, and if they don't, if it looks like they're not doing what you want them to do, it causes problems. The most extreme was when they cut King Charles I's head off, but many others have come close.
When Elizabeth II died, yeah, it's interesting you say that, because her having worked for us. But if you see watching those, the queue winding all the way along the Thames, and I guess that did show how much she was loved in a country that doesn't really express its love very often.
And there was a certain amount of self-love in there as well. It was a sort of love of Englishness and English tradition, and feeling that some part of that had died, but it was this tradition going right back. It was very symbolic that her body was laid to rest in Westminster Hall, Westminster Abbey, which that was built by William II. In the 11th century. It's been there ever since, and
it's an incredible building.
And to think that it's been there ever since, and has had a royal connection ever since, right next to Westminster Abbey, where of course all the monarchs pretty much have been crowned. It's occasions like that that reminds you what this is and what it all means. And I think probably most of those people queuing there would not really have been able to properly articulate what it was, why they were there, what they were mourning. But it was still, whatever it was deeply felt by all of them.
Yeah, I found when I probably lingering on this a little bit too long, but
it's the key. It is the core of any discussion on the monarchy, really.
Well, yes, I found it hugely powerful when Elizabeth was laid in state by the Grenadier Guards.
Yeah,
before the funeral, when she laid in state for a day or so. That service when she was placed in there, I found that hugely emotional, and I didn't expect to. More than the funeral, actually. I found it's just extraordinary.
Well, it was that thing that was really cemented by, I suppose George V started it, but George the Sixth of being, the king and the queen were the father and the mother of the nation. Queen Elizabeth dying was our mother, or probably more people probably thinking in terms of grandmother, but it's it is a weird relationship.
Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99, that's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions since Christmas is coming. Now back to the show. Yeah. So George V, I was when you've done a quiz, and I'll obviously all listeners will have all these links in the show notes for this. But the method of dispatch for George V was that called what's the street terminology for the injection of cocaine and heroin? Is it sort of a something ball, a black ball?
It's a something ball, isn't it?
Yeah. God, yes, I should know this.
Yeah, and you need to make sure you get the amounts right.
My drug terminology.
Or it's not a speedball, is it? Or it's not a highball. That's a cocktail. But yes, his departure was hastened by his doctor. And it's quite an interesting one, because it was to make sure he got in the right. You have the morning papers and the evening papers, and the morning papers are the. Let me get this right. I think the morning papers are the sort of respectable papers, and the evening papers are the more rackety, gossipy papers. And he wanted to make sure the death was timed right, that it would be announced first of all in the morning papers. And that, again, that's this weird thing of manipulating the monarch and the monarchy, because it wasn't about him as a person or his life. It was about the stability of the monarchy and making sure these things happen at the right time. So, yeah, his doctor bumped him off, really.
Yeah, I think it is a speedball. I've just Googled.
Oh, right. It is.
Yes, which yes, I don't know why I was thinking that in the death of Elizabeth II, which is like the opposite. But
Who knows?
I wanted to ask you so I think since you've been doing your podcast, I think about 6 months ago, maybe in a bit, the Channel 4 did a documentary on the princes in the tower.
Yes. Oh, yes. Of
Are you
course, we saw
interested in
that.
this? And as
Well, I
to
am, because that's it's a fascinating thing, because we're talking about things that happened hundreds of years ago, and yet there are certain moments in history that people are still incredibly passionate about and will argue about and will take sides over. Um, I mean, recently I posted something about Oliver Cromwell on Twitter, something to do with the podcast, and immediately there were lots of Irish people or pro-Irish people saying, he was an absolute monster. What he did in Ireland was, you can never forgive him for that. And it still is something that's quite raw today. And the Princes in the Tower is another one. We are still fighting the Wars of the Roses. The supporters of the Yorkist side and the supporters of the Lancastrian, ultimately the Tudor side, he's quite extreme and quite bitter. And I was
they're
lucky enough.
fanatics, you don't want them on your case, Charlie.
Well, the thing is, I've had Matt Lewis, who is the president, I think, of the Richard III Society, or chairman or whatever. And so I had him on, and then I also had Nathan Amin on, who has just published a book. He's Welsh, and he's just published a book on Henry VII. So he's a very strong supporter of the of the Tudors, and Matt Lewis is a passionate supporter of Richard III. And obviously, over the episodes about Richard III and Henry VII, I had to look at all the different theories and weigh it all up. And yes, there are people online and out there in the real world at history festivals who get very angry about this and very passionate. And Matt and Nathan are actually very good friends, and they do quite a lot of events together, and they sort of have a slightly jokey relationship online where they'll sort of support their cause. But at the same time, I'm not sure how jokey it is. But it is extraordinary how people can be violently supporting one side or the other after all this time. And it's quite clear that it can never be proved one way or the other what happened to the princes in the tower. Richard III put them in the tower. And most people would say they were never seen again. But the new theory, well, it's actually not a new theory. That Channel 4 documentary was, I have to say, it was pretty bloody awful. It was presenting a quite an old theory that's just been rehashed by what she called the woman who helped find
yes
Richard III's body. Is she
called
Philippa or something?
Yes, she's very passionate.
Yes, and she's sort of made her whole thing.
We do have a lot to thank her for with the discovery of Richard III.
Yes, although
Rebecca Langley, something.
Philippa Langley.
Philippa Langley. Right.
Anyway, I'll say both, and then you can edit it. Or Philippa Langley.
Yeah, it's Philippa Langley.
And Philippa Langley presenting it, it was like, I found all this new evidence, which it wasn't. It's stuff that's been mulled over for a long time. And yes, she did a huge amount to help the discovery of Richard III's body. But she certainly the Steve Coogan film distorted the facts quite a lot and made it look like it was entirely down to her, and everyone else was absolutely against her, which was not right at all. The university did a huge amount. But anyway, this the counter theory is that the great pretenders, Perkin, Warbeck, and who was the other one?
Something Simnel?
Yeah, Perkin, Warbeck, and Lambert Simnel. Who both claimed to be, I think they both claimed to be one of the princes in the tower. And the counter theory is that actually one of them was. He genuinely was one of the princes in the tower. But I mean, I've looked into it all. And that theory, to make that theory work, you've got to jump through so many hoops and say, well, if this happened and that happened and this happened and then that happened, then this could have happened. And, in any complicated theory like that, and any conspiracy theory and anything you look into, you've always got to look at what is the simplest, most straightforward, most obvious explanation for this. and Richard III being culpable is a so much simpler and clearer explanation than the contortions you have to go to believe that the at least one of the princes in the tower survived and came back later on. You know, Edward V was supposed to be king. His uncle Richard III was supposed to be looking after him. He says to him, "I'm just going to put you in the Tower of London so you're safe, because people will be trying to stop you becoming king." And he keeps him in there. And Richard III says, "Well, the best thing is actually if I become king, you'll be even safer then." And the princes are never seen again. And now, the most obvious explanation for that is that Richard had them quietly disposed of. Now, you can still say on the back of that he wasn't the terrible evil man he was depicted by the Tudors and all their propagandists after Henry VIII had taken control. You can say, well, other than that, he was quite a good bloke. But if you push he was quite a good bloke theory, that doesn't necessarily follow that he also didn't have them bumped off. You can say, yes, he was painted in a very dark light, but he did do these things wrong, which almost anyone else in his position would have done the same.
Well, exactly. If I were a Ricardian, I would be, yes, he killed them and he was right to do it.
Well, that would be the sensible Ricardian approach, but that's not Matt Lewis's approach or Philippa Langley's approach. But
No.
I mean, all those things are very entertaining, and it's great fun, and it brings history alive, and it makes it something, that we can still get involved with. And you can read books with theories on different sides, and you can make your own mind up. So that's why this story of the monarchy is so fascinating and so current. There's so many aspects of it, going right back to William. What is our identity as English people? Are we Celtic Britons? Are we German Angles? Are we Scandinavians? Are we French? Obviously we're a mix of all those things, and but we are still fighting those wars. The North-South divide existed before William came, and the Norman invasion exacerbated that. And also the whole thing of the sort of the metropolitan elite versus the ordinary Anglo-Saxons of England is still this huge argument. It's basically Normans versus Saxons.
Well, yes, I was reading somewhere that a study had been done a few years ago, which established that people with Norman names are more successful, earn more than those with Anglo-Saxon names. It's funny because I'm putting myself into my sort of learning about 1066 and everything. I think I definitely was on Harold Godwinson's side with the Norman invasion.
Yeah, but his identity himself was mixed. He was half Viking. His mother was a Viking. Harold is a Viking name. It's not a Saxon name or a British name. And he had no right to the throne. He claimed that on his deathbed, Edward the Confessor said, "Oh yeah, you should be king." But he had no greater claim to the throne than William did. But there is no doubt that the Norman invasion did cause massive ructions in a country. I mean, particularly the harrying of the north, where he sort of took a scorched earth, genocidal approach to dealing with the problems in the north. So, but if it hadn't been William, it probably would have been someone else, because Edward the Confessor made the mistake of dying without a male heir. And even if Harold had defeated Norman and hung on to the throne, somebody else probably would have come along and deposed him. So I mean, who knows what would have happened? But yeah, the Norman legacy is a fascinating thing. I mean, one of my favorite books is James Hawes' Shortest History of England, which is a fantastic.
I found that book a little bit worrying, actually.
Well, it is, because it is saying that everything that goes on today, in politics, and everything the book came out before the rekindling of Farage and reform and all that, but everything he was saying about about the North-South divide and about the Norman-Saxon divide was acted out over the last couple of years. And what I love about the book is he comes in with a strong theory, and he sticks to that, and it's a book about ideas and the idea of what it means to be English. And I've had him as a guest a few times, and it's something he talks about in the book, and something he talked about in the podcast is the language. The language we use, of the fact that we have two words for almost everything: the sort of the poncy French version and the down to earth Germanic Saxon version. And that sort of academic speak that people find so annoying and is entirely made of French words. And he said one of the main reasons that Boris Johnson was so popular is he very carefully chose Anglo-Saxon words. He didn't go down the sort of Keir Starmer North London lawyer route of using French language. He used basic, down-to-earth Saxon words, and it's a very convincing argument of what English people subliminally react to.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was talking to Dan Jones recently. He's just written a book on Henry V,
yeah,
which is excellent. Who, of course, he introduced English as the sort of the language of the court, and you get these monarchs occasionally just really did have this sort of massive influence on us all. I say it's a lot less so now, I suppose. But is there a particular? We were speculating. Dan Jones was speculating on his sort of favorite monarch, and he settled on Edward VII, who would.
Right. Okay,
which I didn't. I think I banned him from picking a medieval one. And yes, so a chap sort of, I think he said sort of smoking cigars with having relations with someone else's wife, that kind of thing, outrageous behavior similar to George IV.
Well, but he would have been cancelled in about 3 minutes in the modern world. And there is some evidence of some quite unpleasant sort of Me Too behavior, Harvey Goldstein kind of behavior, which he could get away with because he was regent and then king. But yeah, I mean, I prefer monarchs that are a bit more colourful than the plodders who nevertheless actually are very good for the country, in terms of thinking of them as a character and talking about them. Someone like Edward VII is great value. And actually we touched on there, and it's something I talked about because I had Dan Jones on to talk about Richard I, and he pointed out, and it's something that comes up again and again, is that what was considered to be the best way to behave as a king in a medieval period is not the same as today. You wanted a king to be a great warrior, to lead an army, to kill foreigners, particularly the French, and to behave in a kingly manner, to have loads of mistresses, but people would do what they said, and it's kind of all the behavior that now is absolutely frowned on. And Charles in some quarters is accused of being too woke to be our monarch. But if the alternative is starting another crusade, and yes, and Dan Jones, talking about Richard, said he was in many ways a terrible, terrible man, but he was also a great king. So people's behavior you can't really judge at a distance.
Well, Charles seems to be, he's not really done anything. I'm just trying to think of anything he's actually done that has hit the headlines, and it's nothing. He's been completely uncontroversial.
Well, he learnt a lot from his mother, and I think didn't he make a statement along the lines of something like, "Well, I'm going to have to kind of shut up about all this stuff now."
Yeah, he said that before. I think before he was.
His environmental concerns. I mean, what's really interesting is he was mocked for that when he first used to talk about it, and now that's the mainstream. We realize he was absolutely right. So yes, he's very much learnt from his mother. He's also learnt from all of the ructions with Harry and the fact of, like, well, let's try and just not create any bad headlines.
All right, Charlie, this has been great. Before you go,
Mm.
I before we started recording, I was listeners. There's an excellent quiz on one of the episodes on Charlie's podcast, which I did and did very well. You mark your own work though, and I have a question for you, Charlie. Before Elizabeth II, who was the last monarch to be buried?
The last monarch to be buried?
Yes.
As opposed to cremated, or just
well, is this an annoying question? Just buried.
Well, I don't. I'm trying to work out if it's a trick question, because I would assume, if I was asked off the top of my head, that it would have been her father.
Well, he is not the last one to have been buried. It was Richard III.
Really? Well, how do you get that answer then?
Because he was removed from the car park and then buried in Leicester Cathedral in 2016. Was it 16?
Yeah. Well, that is a really good question.
And then before that, it's Edward VIII. And then before that, it's George the Sixth.
Yes, of course, Edward.
So that's one for your next quiz. If there's
write it down.
But listeners, you can get to Charlie's podcast from a link that you'll see in the show notes. Charlie's been fantastic. Thank you. A real pleasure for me to meet you virtually. Thank you.
Well, likewise, it's been great fun, and trying to get a view on exactly what I have been doing by talking about it is always very useful.
Good stuff. Thanks, Charlie.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Plenty more history on the way, but in the meantime, thank you and good night.